that countdown.
Okay.
We are live.
Guys, let's keep quiet.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Yusuf. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah, hope you're well.
Very well, thank you, man. Okay, I'm very, very happy that we are doing this program. It's a very important program, so we'll kick off. We praise Allah and we beseech Allah to guide us on the straight path. And whoever's going to listen to this interaction, hope they will extract some very valuable information. I'd like to introduce Yusuf Ismail. Yusuf Ismail is a legal practitioner reigning from Durban. Yusuf is also very, very active in Dawah circles. He's an intellectual of note. He debates international scholars on international platforms regarding comparative religion, politics, and a variety of other topics. Today we're going to deal and try and unpack the importance of the conflict in the Middle East, particularly the recent bombing in Palestine. So having introduced Yusuf, I will now hand over the floor to Yusuf to and then I'll come back and do sort of a brief introduction to the whole matter, and then we'll interact from there.
Wa alaikum assalam, Fadeel. It's good to have you. We want to thank Suk Islam for being the host of this particular important issue and important program. And just for the viewers out there, Fadeel Hassen himself, who's the moderator for today, for those of you who don't know him, he's a business consultant. He's an entrepreneur, he's been an MC, and of course a chair on many debates and discussions, both locally and of course nationally. And over and above that, he's been the co-founder of the Khidwat al-Awam, if you remember this organization, and being in part and parcel with Hajj Watch. And he's also been a presenter on Voice of the Cape and of course 786, Radio 786 in Cape Town for a number of years. So Fadeel, I just thought that it would be expedient for the viewers out there to know who you are. And of course, to give us a kind of a context behind the discussion in terms of what we're going to unpack, specifically what commenced and happened in the Sheikh Jarrah area, and of course, the recent conflict that is now being described as the possible third intifada. Over to you, Fadeel.
Jazakallah, Yusuf. Shukran. Assalamu alaikum to the viewers internationally and locally. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa ahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Yusuf, and of course that's intertwined with the the aspect of humanitarian crisis as well, and then of course there's also the issue of the scientific side of things. Recently, I'd done a little bit of impromptu research, and I discovered that, ironically, the archaeological finds, and they carbon dated it, and they discovered, therefore, that the original inhabitants of the land were not the Zionist Israelites at all. I tried to, given constraints of time, I was trying to get the article and the professor's name, but I just, for the life of me, I couldn't find it on Google and on YouTube. It's probably erased. And I vaguely recollect some time back, I had a debate with some Zionist Jews as well. And when I mentioned this, I thought it was Professor Oppenheim, but I actually wrote to her, and she wrote back to me to say it wasn't her, but she was slightly aware of this, but she didn't know who it was. So it's quite strange, but it's also not funny that things disappear from public eye, and we obviously know why. Then, of course, we know and understand that the Zionists would like to turn this humanitarian crisis into a religious debate, and obviously they are prejudiced towards Islam, and quite frankly, the Zionists hate Islam. So they would like to use the media to propagate anti-Islamic material out there, and I think the world must become more so aware of this aspect as well. Now, and then of course there's the political history dating back. It's not just from 1948, Yusuf. That was the actual land grab, but we need to unpack the fact that the plot and plan took place in 1917 with the Balfour Declaration. And then I think we wanted to get some special guests on the opposition side, but we failed today. And hopefully we can have a series of debates, maybe a 3-4 part, where we can invite people like Zev Krichler, who is the vice chairperson of SAJPOD, the South African Jewish Board of Deputies. Now, also I would like to get Gareth Cliff, because some 2 years plus ago, I had a personal altercation with him where he went on the air and lambasting at Hamas and the Muslims in Palestine and so on. And recently went on his usual rants again. And look, obviously in that video, he made a confession that he is a Zionist. So he's got his own program now on the air. I think it's called Cliff Central. Not that we should give him airtime, but we should get him on board. I wrote him and challenged him to an international debate with all major media houses recording the debate live. He wrote back and he refused, but he's still going on and doing lots of damage. Then I think we also need to perhaps get Chief Justice Mogoeng, because he's been quite controversial in his utterances. A good a man as he is, and I've got a lot of respect for him. He's actually from my hometown. I differ vehemently with him on the issue of Israel and Palestine. So we need to unpack all these things over a period of time, perhaps in a 3-4 part series or so. But we need to get them on board to really get to the bottom line truth of this, Yusuf.
Yeah, look, basically, let's focus on what has happened. All these characters, we can deal with them one by one. We can deal with these particular characters, Gareth Cliff. We can deal with Mogoeng. We can deal with all these other chaps. I mean, it seems that every man and his dog seems to be coming out of the woodwork. And that's not really a concern if certainly you can control and dictate the discourse. The one point is, what people I think want to know, Fadeel, is what is happening or what has been happening over the past 2 weeks. Now, Fadeel, you are aware, and I think I need to basically share this with you, and then of course we can go on to some of the other issues, particularly in the discussion I sent you earlier by email, is that people need to know that this particular conflict right now, at this particular juncture, only started on the 6th of May. Now, we are the 16th of May right now. This is the 6th of May, which means probably about, close to 10 days ago. What happened is that Palestinians began protesting in Jerusalem over a decision by the Israeli Supreme Court. The court made a decision regarding the eviction of 4 Palestinian families from a place called, a neighborhood called Sheikh Jarrah in East Jerusalem. Now, some people thought, and I've had comments, that Sheikh Jarrah was a sheikh. In fact, Sheikh Jarrah is a neighborhood. It's a suburb in East Jerusalem. The area is illegally and informally annexed to Israel, but under international law, it remains under the Palestinian occupied territories. Now, just give you a background. The Sheikh Jarrah property dispute, it's a long dispute. And what in fact happened is that Israel's laws, the legislation, which is, of course, I would have no hesitance and qualms in describing it as an apartheid state, in fact allows Jews in general, whether you're from Europe, whether you're from America, if you come there, you can get Jewish citizenship. And these same Jews have the ability to file claims over land in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, which they may have owned prior to 1948. But in the case of Palestinians who, if they had ownership of the land in that specific area, they are rejected. Now, Sheikh Jarrah, I mean, the other areas, for example, Haifa, Jaffa, Sarafand. Sheikh Jarrah is one particular neighborhood in East Jerusalem. And so by virtue of this law that came out, and of course the Supreme Court then made an order to say these people can be evicted. You stay in Santon, you stay in Bramley, you stay in Alberton, and then suddenly the High Court makes an order that you have to be evicted. With no claim, no bank is mortgaging your house. There's no repossession of your house. They just want you out of the house. So that's basically what happened. Now, as a result of this eviction that happened, I think, a couple of days ago, then on the 6th of May, not surprisingly, Palestinians began protesting in Jerusalem over the decision by the Israeli Supreme Court. And the protests, in fact, happened on the night of Laylatul Qadr. I can't remember when exactly Laylatul Qadr was. I think I can't remember whether it was I think a Monday. I think it was a Sunday or Monday. I can't remember now.
Friday, I think it was.
No, I don't think it was a Friday. It was either a Sunday. It was a Sunday or a Monday, one of the days. But in any event, what happened was that the protests coincided with that, and then as a result of these, and what they were doing, they were engaged in worship. They were asking Allah for assistance, and as a result of that, you then had the Israeli Defense Force coming in and barging and invading the Al-Aqsa Masjid, which they had no right to do, and started tear gassing and shooting these thugs. They started shooting children with rubber bullets, shooting the elderly, shooting women who were there present, and of course throwing tear gas. Now, what had happened is that it's quite ironic because this confrontation, or this, I wouldn't say confrontation, this attack by the Jewish Israeli soldiers happened ahead of the Jerusalem Day march, which was arranged by far-right Jewish nationalists. And as a result of this initial conflict at Al-Aqsa Masjid, about close to 300 people were injured, all of them Palestinians. There were obviously a few soldiers that were attacked here and there, but it was mainly Palestinians that were injured. And then subsequently, you had an escalation. People were obviously dissatisfied in Israel, Israeli Arabs, who are obviously Palestinians as well, but they are Arabs living in Israel with limited rights to citizenship. They started protesting on the streets. And then what subsequently happened right up to now, you've got about 200 dead people, approximately 200 dead Palestinians. You've got, hundreds of, at least close to thousands of injured individuals at this particular point in time. We've seen gruesome and horrific imagery that is taking place at this specific juncture. And just yesterday, I was quite shocked. I did a podcast session last night, and just a few hours before that, they bombed the Associated Press building, as well as the Al Jazeera offices, the Al Jazeera building, which was in fact which was owned by Al Jazeera, and from where Al Jazeera was in fact broadcasting. Now, there's certainly an aim behind this, and the aim behind the destruction is to ensure that legitimate reports in terms of the Israeli brutality does not get out, because the Associated Press is, you can argue Al Jazeera may be subjective, although that's a debate. Associated Press had no ideological bent. They've been covering the area for, I think, close to 25 years, and they're now out. So it's clearly the constant refrain to shut you down, and of course shut down your particular views and shut down a perspective which in fact blows open the cover of the Israeli brutality. And I think yesterday, subject to correction, and you can correct me, Fadeel, probably now for the first time I've been seeing on BBC and even on CNN and some of these other major news networks where the actions of the Israeli military were so blatant. And because the Associated Press is a Western press outfit, the cover was essentially blown. You know, the Associated Press traditionally, if you look at some of the reports in the 90s and the 2000s, I mean, they were, I wouldn't say biased, but always giving the Israeli position in many instances, historically speaking. Now it was open. I mean, there was no defense that Israel could, in fact, show. And the only response that they got was that these buildings were in fact harboring Hamas intelligence, which is absolute rubbish. Why on earth would the Associated Press building be a party to, in fact, harboring Hamas intelligence networks or Hamas intelligence. It's insane. So, and therefore you have a situation where there's ongoing violence that is taking place. There's a bombardment of Gaza. There's a bombardment of buildings and residential areas. The common refrain, and this was asked to me yesterday about Hamas rockets. These rockets fired by Hamas are ineffective. They don't do any damage whatsoever. They're like the equivalent of firecrackers. You cannot compare the Hamas rockets, which are fired in response to Israeli aggression, with the subsequent bombardment and total destruction of infrastructure, land, cars, vehicles, families, and people being killed. And I mean, there have been people that have been burnt alive by this Jewish extremist state, and certainly the Zionists in power. And what happens in the process in Sheikh Jarrah, Israeli settlers come and then they start taking more and more land. And we've seen images just over the past couple of days where one overweight Jewish settler, in fact, told the individuals that if I don't steal your land, someone else will steal it. I mean, imagine the damn cheek and audacity. I don't steal your land, so therefore somebody else will steal it. So I need to take your land away. So that's essentially what the conflict is right now. And people now, particularly in the press, have been calling this as possibly the third intifada. You know, the first intifada was in 88, 89, way back more than 30 years ago. The second intifada was in 2000, you know, at the Oslo Accords, which where the so-called fake peace accords fell into bands. And now people are saying that this is possibly a third intifada, which and that is why Netanyahu, if you saw his speech that he delivered yesterday, is so fearful of the potential of what may possibly happen, and was in fact speaking about taking full force and full action. And that's basically what's going on. What angers me particularly is that, you know, those people who were in fact voting for Joseph Biden and Kamala Harris, who was viewed as the first woman of color, I mean, quite insane, and quite the cynicism of the whole thing. You think you've got a woman of color there, that you're going to make significant change. She was quite clear at the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee that Israel has the right to defend itself. I mean, this is the constant mantra that all US presidents have made from time immemorial, and certainly the deputy presidents. And so I was not surprised by comments at all. Over to you, Fadeel.
Thanks, Yusuf. Yeah, Yusuf, it's not surprising that that they use the media outlets to as a conduit for their propaganda and so on. But we mustn't sidetrack from the fact that they tie this in with creating animals like Al Qaeda, ISIS, and these kind of outfits, and then try to defame Islam and say, but this is a religious thing. This is Muslims. This is the way they behave. And it's supported by the Quran, the religious scripture. And then they misquote ayahs out of context from Surah Tawbah, Surah 9, slay them wherever they are and so on. But they forget that this ayahs are strictly in defense of justice. And they forget to quote the other ayahs that says, but if only in defense are you allowed to kill, not as a perpetrator. And they conveniently forget to say that Allah also says that when they incline towards peace, embrace them and forgive them, and do not and take much care that you do not transcend the boundaries of justice. So in essence, they Yeah.
I'll just give a notification, Fadeel, that the internet connection may be possibly weak. So I think we need to probably move on quickly with some of the issues. That's why I don't know if it's from your section or my section. I think the network connection is slightly challenging, and I think the problem is because of the fact that Telkom has installed fiber, and now it's somehow the other affecting at some level the ADSL because they haven't yet connected fiber. Look, Fadeel, from my perspective, okay. I don't care. I don't think Al Qaeda.
I've lost your signal there. I've lost the signal.
Yusuf, we've lost you.
Uh, yeah, Yusuf, I think we've lost you, Yusuf. It appears our signal is fine on my side. It's probably your side, Yusuf. Can you hear us? I think we've lost Yusuf there, Ahmad.
Fadeel, can you fill in till we try to get Yusuf back on?
Yeah, okay, I'll continue. I think it's very important that while we're still on the religious aspect, we need to mention that the Quran, both the Quran and the Bible, is congruent in the position of standing with the Palestinians. I mean, if you look at Ezekiel 36, verse 18 to 21, which is in the Old Testament, it clearly says that because of the arrogance of the Israelites at the time, they've breached the covenant of the Almighty. And as a result, remember, the covenant was given to them with a precondition. It wasn't a carte blanche covenant to say that you are now the chosen people and that's it. You have to earn it. And they didn't earn it because they were breaching the word of God. And every time the amana, the promise, the contract, the covenant with God was breached because in the way they treat Moses and so on. And so as a result of that, God Almighty had decided to punish them. And as a punishment for their haughtiness and arrogance, they were basically scattered all over the world. And this is in the Bible. So if they were scattered all over the world, by implication, it means that they have no homeland at all. I mean, it's obvious, it's common sense. If you are scattered, are you in one position? You are not. You are scattered all over the world. And if you look at historically, I think Ezekiel came something like 536 years before Jesus. And Jesus came now 2,000 years ago. So if you add 2,000 plus 536 years, you're looking at the problem started 2,536 years ago already, which effectively means the only recourse is to God Almighty on the day of judgment. They've got no right. They have no homeland at all. So they came from Europe. They came from Poland. They came from France. They came from wherever else in Europe. And they came to settle in Palestine, made it their homeland, stole the home, stole the land, violently abused women and children, raped women, mass murdered children, applied the genocidal rules, and trying to take over and make it their land. I've listened to Gareth Cliff, for example, on his video. He's quite a joker. Really, we need to hold him over his knuckles for distorting history and for distorting justice like this, justifying that the land belonged to the Zionists. I don't know where he got that history from. We need to rewrite history. I know history is part of propaganda, and there's a lot of garbage in between. But seriously, this guy really, really needs to be educated. You know, he was challenged before. He responded with ad hominem by insulting us and then finally refusing to debate the matter. What kind of a coward is he? But this is typical the Zionist approach. It's typically the Zionist approach. I think, is Yusuf, are you back on? Oh, Yusuf is still connecting. So I'll continue then while we're connecting. Yusuf. Yeah, okay, you're back.
You know, Fadeel, this is
I was just outlining.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yeah. Now, I was just outlining the concept of Ezekiel 36, verse 18 to 21, where God Almighty had scattered the Israelites all over the world because of their arrogance. So if you use a little bit of common sense and wisdom, and you understand that if Almighty said His land, and Ezekiel came, 536 years before Jesus. So 2,536 years ago, they were cursed by God Almighty. So the only recourse is with God on the day of judgment and not with the Palestinian issue. So maybe you are an expert on comparative religion. Maybe you can unpack the religious side as well. And then, of course, we'd like to go on to the United Nations resolution, hundreds of which were breached by them.
Yeah.
But we also need to understand that, who owns the United Nations? Who owns NATO? Who owns IMF? Who owns World Bank?
Yeah, let me come on that point.
Economy?
Yeah. But let me come on that specific issue. The main point is this, is that Jews cannot, the present Jews, they have absolutely no religious claim. I mean, even let's assume you use the biblical verses of Ezekiel or whatever the case is. And I've seen arguments where they make some degree of legitimacy on the Bible. Let's assume the Bible is right, that they do have a claim. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that the Bible is correct, that they do have a claim. The Jews that are presently there in Israel, let's get this clear. Prior to the bombing into existence of Israel, you had Palestinian Christians, Palestinian Muslims, and you had Sephardic Jews who stayed there. The Jews that are now there in Israel are in fact from Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and are in fact from the, historically from the Khazar region. The background is that in 740 AD, you had the Khazarians, the Khazar individual, the land that is between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, which is now predominantly occupied by Georgia. There were a group of people that were there. And under King Bulan in 740 of the Common Era, they converted to Judaism, and then they moved to Western Europe, they moved to Germany, they moved to Poland, and they moved to all the other parts of the world. So historically, even if there was a legitimate claim from the biblical point of view that Jews have a right to Israel or Palestine, these individuals who are claiming to be Jewish and who are described as Ashkenazi, that's the term used for European Jews, Ashkenazi, they have no claim because they are in fact European. 90% of the people in the world today who call themselves Jewish are actually descendants of the Khazars, or as they like to be known, the Ashkenazi. Quite interesting, the word, the Nazi Jews. And knowingly they lie to the world with the claims of the land. So I'm not even bothered. I'm not even bothered about these so-called biblical claims. And of course, you point this out that there is no legitimacy in the biblical claims. But even if there was a legitimacy in the biblical claims as it stands, still that would not apply to these particular individuals because they are European Jews. They are Europeans predominantly. They are from Central Europe. They come from the Khazar region, and their descendants, their ancestors, in fact, converted to Judaism in the 8th century, and then subsequently they moved to different parts of the world. So I think that is an important point when we need to establish, more specifically, if you take into account the fact that Zionism, which is a kind of a support for the establishment of the Jewish state, is a movement that in fact emerged in the late 19th century. And when did it emerge? It didn't emerge in Palestine amongst the Jews. It emerged in Central Europe. It emerged in Eastern Europe. And it was developed by people like Theodor Herzl, Chaim Weizmann. These were not by any means religiously minded Jewish people. They were secularists, but they used religion to justify their particular point of view. And so not surprisingly, it's been classified as racist, exceptionalist, and in fact, this call to going back to Palestine was simply an excuse to, in fact, gain and segment political power and establish their political elite dominance that subsequently happened when Palestine was created. Now, the point I need to establish is this: is that there are two books. This is an excellent book. Some of you should get it. I don't know if you can see it on my screen. Can you see this? It's fairly straightforward. It's very simple. Why Israel? The Anatomy of Zionist State by Feroz Osman and Media Review Network. Quite a good book. It gives you an introductory background to the story. And get a copy of this book by Yuri Davis called Apartheid Israel, Possibilities for the Struggle Within, which gives you a good overall background. And what the point is when you read these books is that they in fact give you the full background of what happened. I think the background in challenging the legitimacy of the state of Israel does not necessarily rest in dealing with it from the biblical perspective, which some have basically claimed to do, because a lot of these Jews in Israel, a lot of these Israelis are not religiously minded people. Where's the largest gay pride parade festival? You know, the gay pride parade festival. It's in Israel. Now, this is in Israel, and it's got support by the Israeli government. It's got support by the Israeli government. So the issue is not so much on, because a lot of these people don't care about religion. What the state of Israel needs to be viewed is as a separate colonial settler project. The reality of this is that, historically speaking, you had, we can probably go into that. Maybe you can ask me a few questions. What led to the creation of the state of Israel? It began as early as the late 19th century. But what had essentially happened, and I think what people may not be aware of, is that Theodor Herzl published his book called Der Judenstaat in German. He was German Jew, which laid the basis for the foundation of a Jewish state. In 1913, you had the establishment of the Anti-Defamation League of the B'nai B'rith, which in fact created this propaganda for the ongoing creation of a Jewish state. And this was before the British took over Palestine from the Ottomans. And then in 1917, for the first time, you had what we would call the Balfour Declaration, which is a public statement that was issued by the allegedly British government, announcing the establishment of a national home for Jewish people. Now, if you look at the Balfour Declaration, it is not, they call it a public statement, but it is actually a letter from Lord Arthur Balfour to Lord Lionel Walter Rothschild, who was the leader of the British Jewish community. He was a Britisher. He was from the United Kingdom. He was an Englishman, an English Jewish person. And the letter was written from Arthur Balfour, the Foreign Secretary, to him, both British citizens, telling them, we now want to create a homeland for the Jewish people. And this happened immediately, after the declaration of war on the Ottoman Empire in 1914. So you see the breakup of the Ottoman Empire in the First World War. Then Palestine, which was formerly under Ottoman rule, now comes under the British mandate. So it's controlled by the British. Now, by virtue of the fact that it's under the British, they now are saying, what should we do with this particular land? This is arable land. Maybe we should have the creation of it. Why not create a new state? And so they then had internal meetings, internal policies. And of course, a lot of people favored this kind of partition. And so the main point being made is that it was a kind of a power struggle. If you look at the events leading up to the Balfour Declaration, the wider war of the First World War had reached a stalemate. The British allies were not fully engaged with each other. United States hadn't suffered a casualty as such, and the Russians were in the midst of a revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution that was taking place with Stalin and Lenin and so on. So now you had an idea here that, look, let's create a Jewish state. But one thing which is important, if you look at the Balfour Declaration, that letter categorically states, and I've got the letter before me, that the rights of the indigenous people shall not be affected. Now, who are the indigenous people? The Palestinian Christians, Palestinian Muslims, and Sephardic Jews. These were Semites. Jews were staying there. These were Jewish people who were there from inception. But when these colonial settlers from Europe came there and bombed it into existence, Sephardic Jews were down the ladder, Palestinian Christians were down the ladder, and Palestinian Muslims were right at the bottom of the ladder. So even today in Israel, you find if you're Jewish, you have to be a Jewish white. You have to be a white man to be at the top of the ladder. If you're an Ethiopian Jew, if you're a Jew from Ethiopia, what do they do to you? They sterilize you. They sterilize you to ensure that you don't have any more children, because they don't want black Jews. They want a land full of white Jews. So if Moses was here today in Israel, they would have probably even kicked him out, because Moses wouldn't fit the definition. He would be too dark-skinned for these whites that were there and that are part and parcel of the European society. So it's just simply a colonial project. So for me, the greatest attack is looking at the historical context in which this is basically developed. Zionism is a political ideology that uses religion to establish its own political goals and agendas. This is the main point. You know, families like the Rothschilds and others, David Ben-Gurion, David Ben-Gurion made a point, Fadeel, I don't have the quote here. He said that if he had the choice to save all the Jews living in Germany during the Holocaust by sending them to England, and the alternative is saving half the Jews or 1/3 of the Jews by sending them to Israel, he would opt for the latter. He would send them to Israel. So they were not concerned about the murder and massacre of Jewish people under Nazi Germany. They were there concerned about the establishment of this elitist project, which would segment their power. And in fact, in a manner of speaking, if you look at the Rothschilds family, you look at many of these other families that were in Europe, they were working behind the scenes. Now, for the first time, they would be in the forefront, and they would essentially be controlling the helms of power and, in fact, administering their full will and their full ambition. So I think that's the background in terms of how we need to view this particular conflict. Over to you, Fadeel.
Thanks. Just to add on there, Yusuf, we need to, it's not ironic for me to think that the Orthodox Jews are really standing up now against these Zionist Jews. And so you, like you correctly mentioned there, that Zionism is not a religion, unlike Judaism or Christianity, which we as Muslims respect. We are commanded in the Quran to respect all previous revealed scriptures. So as a religion, we cannot be anti-Semitic as we are being accused each time we speak about justice and these concepts. We just cannot be. We are part of the three great Abrahamic faiths. Zionism is not a religion, and people need to understand this. Zionism is an ideology. It's a cult, basically, and it's premised on on power for the expediency of material gain, wealth and control and that type of thing, at all costs, whether it's rape, whether it's oppression, whether it's genocide, whatever the case might be. And fortunately now, more and more Christian brethren and even sane-minded Jews are standing up against these Zionists. And many of these Zionists, you've mentioned, the Balfour Declaration and so on. Many of these people are actually atheists. Although their roots are from Jews, they stem from Judaism, but they've turned atheists. I mean, Netanyahu himself, he uses the Bible when it suits him, the Torah, and he quotes, but then he never lives by it. He never swear by it. He never gained access to parliament by placing his hand on the Bible, on the Torah. He doesn't believe in God. So this is how they play around, and this is how they plot the Muslims against the Christians and against good-minded, sane-minded Jews as well. But this is the tactic. I've listened the other day to Zev Krechler from Sajbod, and he, with BDS and with ex-minister Ronnie Kasrils, he went down the same lane again, surprised that they didn't attack him.
Your network is going off, Fadeel. Fadeel, your network is slightly bad. Let me just come in quickly on that. Yeah, Fadeel, let me just come in quickly on that because your network has gone down slightly.
Yes.
So if I could just come in and take in from you. Zev Krechler, I want to put out a challenge to Zev Krechler. Fadeel, are you there? I just want to put out a challenge to Zev because I think that the audience, the viewers lost you slightly because the network was down. I want to put out a challenge to Zev Krechler. Zev Krechler, we are willing to publicly challenge him to a debate or a dialogue on any platform, on this platform, on any other platform, together with any member of the South African Jewish Board of Deputies. And we also put out a friendly invite to the Chief Justice, Mogoeng, to either address the pros and cons of Israel or the ethnic cleansing that is being committed by the Israelis towards the Palestinians from a religious point of view, as well as from a political and human rights point of view. For years, we've been looking to debate this specific issue, but nobody would be willing and bold enough to come in and debate this particular aspect. So we're challenging Jews out there. We're challenging Zionist Jews out there. I challenge the South African Jewish Board of Deputies. Let's debate these issues. Let's debate the Holocaust. Before you accuse me of Holocaust denialism, let's come and debate the Holocaust. Let's debate the genocide and the ethnic cleansing that has been committed by the state of Israel. Come and debate us. I just want to take on the other point that you made about the ultra-Orthodox Jews. Let me make it clear. Ultra-Orthodox Jews, in fact, form part and parcel of the settler community in Israel. They are part of the settlers. But the ultra-Orthodox Jews that are opposed to the state of Israel are those Jews that are staying in New York. I've had some interaction with them in 2009. In fact, there's a program that is online, Is Israel Set Up for Spiritual Destruction? Rabbi Israel Dovid, I forget his surname, nice chap. He was the leader of the Netzrai Karta. And these are ultra-Orthodox Jews that believe that Jews are meant to be in perpetual exile. And so any claim to a legitimate state or a geographically bound nation state would be totally contrary to the to the biblical position, because the Bible, in fact, says that they are meant to be perpetually in the wilderness. And there is going to be no eventual return to the state of Israel until, of course, the Messiah comes back, the legitimate Messiah, not Jesus Christ, according to them. So they are in a minority position, but increasingly a lot of Jewish writers and scholars have spoken out against the state of Israel in years. Norman Finkelstein, ask your viewers to check him up. He's a descendant of Holocaust survivors. Noam Chomsky, he's now 91 years old. Noam Chomsky, a Jewish intellectual, probably one of the greatest political analysts of the 20th century, spoke out against Israel. Dr. Yuri Davis, a Palestinian activist. Ilan Pappé, who spoke about the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. A lot of these Jewish intellectuals are now coming out, speaking and condemning the state of Israel as certainly an evil, brutal state that, in fact, is in fact the blueprint for a global Orwellian society, a global Orwellian nation state that should in fact be disbanded totally, and certainly you need the creation of a unity government. The reality of the position, Fadeel, and I'm going to hand over to you, is that at this particular point in time, over the past 10 months since the outbreak, Israel has arrested at least 400 children. It is the only country in the world, whereby children under the age of 18 can be sentenced to life imprisonment and can be sentenced to inordinately long prison sentences. Since 1967, you've had a situation where there's about close to 20,000 Palestinian women that have been kept incarcerated. Since 2015, 7,000 children have been arrested for throwing stones at the Palestinian tanks, who then shoot them down. So the reality is all this conflict arises from constant takeover land. I mean, if the government comes today and says, you must get out of your land, we need to take your house, it's for these people here, what will we do? There'll be an uproar. Yet in Israeli society, the Israeli government authorizes its own citizens to take over the land of Palestinians, not in Israel, but living in the occupied territories, which are not part of the so-called Israeli nation state. So in the Gaza, in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, they build this massive wall which intersects between villages, appropriates land, and then you see Israeli settlers, even on their own accord, without any kind of mandate from government, on their own, they go and just simply walk into somebody's house and they take over someone's house. They destroy the crops, they destroy the olive trees. So that's where the conflict is. The apartheid, there's apartheid law that is there. For example, even amongst Israeli Arabs living in Palestine, in Israel, Israeli Arabs don't have the same level of education as the Jewish counterparts amongst Jewish children. So there's clearly a distinction between each other. The law of return, it only applies to Israeli citizens. A Jew, for example, can come from America and he can get citizenship in Israel. Whereas a Palestinian woman or a Palestinian man who marries an Israeli, he or she cannot get citizenship. I mean, in South Africa, what happens? Some of these Pakistani expats, these Pakistanis come to South Africa, or foreigners come, Nigerians come, and they marry South African women. What happens? They then can acquire citizenship. Israel is one of the only countries in the world where if you're a foreigner, if you're a Palestinian and you marry an Israeli, you will still be given second-class citizenship. You will not be given that right of citizenship. So there's clearly discrimination. There's features and areas and roads, for example, where Palestinians cannot walk and where Israelis can walk. And they sometimes justify this on the basis of security. But in reality, it is apartheid that is enacted in the legislation. It is the last remaining apartheid state, but I'll go further. It is a blueprint. It is a blueprint of a global Orwellian state. I mean, the one point which is quite remarkable, Fadeel, and I'll leave it at that. Scott Balfour, who interviewed me yesterday, we discussed the issue that Israel today is the only country in the world where 75% of the people have been vaccinated. People have been talking about the vaccine. The largest vaccinated people against the so-called COVID-19 disease is, in fact, the state of Israel. And Israel has introduced the vaccine passport, where now, not only against Palestinians, but Israeli citizens who do not have the vaccination cannot enter buildings, cannot engage in certain shoppings, cannot go to certain government locations, and so on and so forth. So this is a blueprint for Nazism. This is a blueprint for a global Nazi dictatorship. Israel is a Nazi state. It is a fulfillment of the same forces that were behind the backing of the Third Reich in Germany, are the same forces that led to the creation of this Israeli terror state, which was certainly bombed into existence and totally destroyed the rights of the indigenous people who were the original occupants of the land. Over to you, Fadeel.
Yusuf, thanks. Yusuf, you've rounded off very, very well the biblical or scriptural narrative. I want to go on to the political narrative, but before I get there, I just want to reiterate the importance that both Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all three Abrahamic faiths, speak with one voice. You can go to Surah 2, Surah Baqarah, Surah 5, Surah Maida, and Surah 17, Al-Isra, and you can compare that with Ezekiel and even Genesis and so on. So they speak in tandem. So there is no religious argument. Now we have to understand that the Zionists are using the religion to split and divide and rule us. And that's an old colonial strategy. It's a stratagem that they've been using for centuries and decades. And the world needs to wake up to that. There are too few people who are swinging to the side of justice. And we need to speak to our Jewish friends and Christian friends and make it understand. Because even in Christianity, they believe that this is God's prescription until the Messiah comes, as you've mentioned. But, the big question I ask them, and I enter a lot of these debates with Christian missionaries, and I ask them, if this is what your God prescribed, do you believe your God is an oppressor? Because you will, any God who permits and allows oppression on this particular scale that it is in Palestine or occupied Palestine cannot be a true God. No God will give an indication to destroy people and maim people and rape people and create genocide against an innocent people and justify that in what way possible. So our friends our Abrahamic friends need to understand we have to speak with one voice. And the minute we can topple Zionism and make Zionism extinct as a cult, as an ideology, the better for the world, for world peace to prevail. Now, having covered the religious aspect, well, can we go on to the political, dimension? And here I need to say very emphatically, the ANC is basically a bunch of thugs. And I'm not fearful to mention that on record because they give contradictory statements and I understand it's the nature of politics to garner favor, economic favor, etc., etc. I mean, they've been supplying arms to Israel. Now was clear on this, where they manufacture these arms and supply Israel. They speak anti-Israel, but you need a passport for Israelis and a visa for Israelis to enter South Africa, but not for the Israelites. So what kind of double standards are they playing? Nelson Mandela said that Palestine, South Africa will never be free until Palestine is free. So this kind of hypocrisy within the ANC, we need to unravel. we need to ask the DIRCO and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, why do they still have diplomatic ties with apartheid Israel when the United Nations and other bodies declared Israel an apartheid state, basically. So I'd like you to unpack that for the viewers and listenership in that regard, please, Yusuf.
This is the old, some years back, Patrick Bond basically wrote a book called Talk Left, Walk Right. Patrick Bond was a lecturer at the University of
Professor, yeah.
I believe, Professor Patrick Bond. I knew him pretty well. He wrote a book. Is that the ANC has been constantly engaging in what we would call this hypocritical cynicism. I mean, as much as you have Lindiwe Zulu, I don't have much respect for speaking out against the state of Israel and apparently condemning Israel, whilst at the same time continuing to do business with the state, is a kind of a cynical attempt to
Yusuf, we've lost you there. Your network, Yusuf. I think we've lost you, Yusuf, your network.
Fadeel, can you take over?
Yes, okay. Let me perhaps take over there, Yusuf, until we try to make contact with you again. Look, for the life of me, I cannot politically understand that the ANC applies this kind of double standards. On the one hand, they uphold diplomatic ties with Israel, and initially I thought maybe it's a stratagem, maybe it's clever of them to keep ties, because you have to keep your enemy close, but your real enemy even closer to you. So you need to understand their mindset and how they think and so on. But after years, I can't see the wisdom in that. I can't see that they want to keep diplomatic ties when the world has condemned them. The United Nations condemned them. And I'm also not sure, I'm confused whether United Nations is sincere in their condemnation, because who controls the United Nations? And that is the question I asked Yusuf earlier on. We need to unpack that aspect as well. Who control the world economy? Who are the Rothschilds? Who are the Soroses? Who are the Rockefellers? And so on, and let's go deep into the history of the Zionists and the atheists, the Ben-Gurions and the likes, and see how did the economic tentacles enwrap us as over decades. From an economic or socio-economic perspective, how do they control the Reserve Bank? How do they control the international markets, paper money, all this kind of paper economy, lending? How does the banks operate, the interest earn and all that? This is part of their broader plan. No wonder Jesus in the Bible also turned the tables, against the Jews for their indulgence in interest and riba, because it's compounded, and because of the compound nature of it, it's interest upon interest, and that's where exploitation sets in. And these are the things that we need to bring sanity to. We need to transform the entire world economy, basically. But it's such a tough task. We need to, they're all interwoven, whether you speak politics, economics, and the social political nature of things. They all interrelated. And I can't for the life of me see that the ANC can't see it as a government on the whole, but also as the leading party within government. Why do they hold ties, diplomatic ties with Israel? Why don't they recall the ambassador? Why don't they, they're part of BRICS, but why don't they indulge Russia a little bit more than we know that economically speaking as well, that America pumps through $300 million per month into the Israel economy, arming them very, very well. So they're arming the terrorists, but they claim they are not the terrorists. They are the defenders of terrorism. I don't know. Where is the sense with this, Yusuf?
Fadeel, let me come back. Sorry about that. I apologize. We'll have to wrap up because the internet connection is so poor. Let me just put this facts out there. South African government, the ANC South African government, according to the Israeli Trade Mission to South Africa, our country, the ANC government, imports 3.4 billion rands worth of Israeli goods and services every year. Much of it is computer software. They import chemicals. They import electrical items. Israel and ANC South Africa, the government, also have ties in agriculture. They co-host roadshows in South Africa, I think last year, if I'm not mistaken, that showcase what they call the Israeli smart agriculture technologies. Now, when apartheid South Africa was isolated internationally by the whole world, there were still close links between the South African and the Israeli states. For example, the mining house De Beers, I want people to know this, mining house De Beers, they exported rough diamonds worth billions of rands, billions, to Israel for cutting, polishing, and exporting to the rest of the world. After the ANC government came to power in 1994, that still happens today. That still happens. So whilst, and some would argue, and again, I think because South African government, there was a report which says that it's arming or certainly purchasing, sending arms to Saudi Arabia and vice versa. At the same time, it also buys weaponry from the state of Israel and supports the weaponry. They use the intelligence network, and I've got contacts with someone within the State Security Agency. You remember we did the interview, I think, 2 years ago on ITV. This guy clearly stated that there are links with Mossad and the State Security Agency in South Africa. I mean, the arms dealer, the veteran arms dealer, Terry Crawford Brown, he stated that Israel is one of the top 10 global arm exporters, and arms import. The ANC government is importing arms from Israel since 2000, and we're looking at sophisticated equipment. So they are importing arms to South Africa. The ANC government is paying them. And you know, when you look at the Marikana massacre in 2012, what was used on those miners? They used the G3 rifles. Those G3 rifles that were used by the South African police, the semi-automatic G3 rifles, they were imported from the state of Israel, paid for by the South African government, manufactured by Danel under license from Israel. So the South African government, and I want the people to know there, is a part and parcel and complicit in the massacre that is taking place at this particular time. So we should not have this slogan. We should not be, enamored by the sloganeering that takes place. Or you want to have a big, what they call this banquet for Cyril Ramaphosa. Let's call him in, let him read Maghrib Salah. That shows what a beautiful, wonderful man he is. Or call the ANC government. The reality is that you have the case of hypocritical cynicism. You need decisive action. We don't need condemnation on the one hand. If you condemn someone and then you in bed with the same person, what does it make you? It makes you a hypocrite. Yeah. In Islam, you call someone a munafiq.
I need your opinion on, look, I'm very concerned about CODESA. What happened there pre-94? Cyril Ramaphosa was one of the chief negotiators with Ruth Meyer. Ruth Meyer was then with the Nationalist Party, and obviously Cyril Ramaphosa was with Mandela and so on. But what happened there? Remember, Cyril Ramaphosa was with NUM, the National Union of Mine
National
Workers.
Union of Mine Workers, yes.
Correct, yeah, he was the GS, General Secretary. So this man was a pauper. He's got a BA degree, a junior law degree. And all of a sudden, after CODESA, this guy became a billionaire. I need to understand, why can't South Africans ask for lifestyle auditing and do a bit of due diligence on these characters? We look at the Zondo Commission. Every day you're looking at more skeletons coming out of the cupboard. Yeah. But where are the South Africans? They're not speaking up. 500 billion rand disappeared from the coffers.
I agree. We need to have significant lifestyle audits, although that's another topic on its entirety. But the point being made now, regardless of CODESA and all of that, which we've It's certainly an important issue. Presently, what we are dealing with in this current crisis, and we are talking from a South African perspective, and I don't think anyone on any platform in South Africa is discussing this now, other than probably on social media platforms, but not on live shows. There's presently no impediment to the ANC government. Nothing is stopping the ANC government from presently instituting sanctions against the state of Israel to end trade. The sanctions that the South African government would impose on the state of Israel would also pressure other Southern African countries like Angola, Botswana, to end their diamond trade with Israel. The ANC just simply refuses and ignores this imperative to contribute to ending apartheid in Israel, which doesn't make sense. You know, sending leaders, sending ordinary members to attend protests in support of Palestine, and you were part of a protest, I think, yesterday, it's rubbish. It's absolute rubbish because it's a politically meaningless gesture you designed to pacify sentiment rather than exerting the real pressure on the Israeli state. And what we need to do as a people, if we're really geared up, we need to collectively pressurize, maybe legally or otherwise, ensure that the ANC government severes its diplomatic ties with the state of Israel. I mean, you made the point earlier that Palestinians have to apply for visas, and there's a lengthy process by the Department of Home Affairs. They have to provide proof of medical insurance, hotel booking, that they got sufficient funds for their stay. But when it comes to Israelis, they don't have to do any of that. And with the permission of the ANC government right now, and I've seen it with my own eyes, and I've come across these people myself personally, the Israeli Secret Service Mossad, and I've met Mossad individuals and characters over the years. They've come to the IPCI. They've seen what goes on. These individuals have been operating in the interrogation room at OR Tambo Airport for decades, since 2000. So every Palestinian solidarity activist, if you're a trade unionist or you're a pro-Palestinian academic, you know, for the past 20 years or so on, a lot of them have been grilled. They have been interrogated for their political views before being allowed to travel to Palestine. Nobody talks about that. How and on what basis? I think there was a couple of years back at the OR Tambo Airport, the Israeli secret intelligence goes and stops someone and starts questioning, who the hell are you? I mean, who on earth are you? Get the hell out of here to come on my country as a foreign intelligence outfit, thinking you're a James Bond kind of individual and questioning me or someone else about what has happened. The reality is this: right now, the death toll is increasing. Right now, Israel is bombing apartment blocks in Gaza. Right now, Israel is killing children. Right now, Israeli settlers are taking over the land of the Palestinian people. Right now, 9 Palestinian children are being killed. Right now, there are fighter jets that are bombing Gaza as we speak right now. And Israeli soldiers are now presently invading the West Bank and are picking up young men to prison. Not in the area where the conflict originally started, but in other places right around. And even in Israel itself, Israeli Arabs living in the state of Israel are being rounded up and basically being kept incarcerated in Israel. So with all of that is happening at this juncture, with this brutality that is reaching a new crescendo, DIRCO, the South African Department of International Relations and Cooperation, you know, how did they describe it? They described it as clashes. They didn't describe it as ethnic cleansing. And I might tell you, DIRCO has sued me. DIRCO instituted an action against me some years back when I was doing a program on one of the Islamic television stations in South Africa, where we were speaking about the South African support for the government of India. And one of the individual characters that came out and was mentioned was a chap called Anil Suklal. DIRCO, which is, involves itself in international relations, they're not describing the conflict for what it is, which is ethnic cleansing, which is brutality, which is an attack. They're describing it as just simply clashes, no different from what the US State Department is saying. So in a sense, all of this is going to continue from a political point of view unless the ANC government makes a strong attempt to do a change. But they won't. They won't. Because this is a government which has no morality. This is a government that does not care about the lives of the people, as we can clearly see in the lockdown. And This is a government that is not concerned about human rights. I mean, for heaven's sake, if you don't care about the human rights of your own people in South Africa, where children have to drown in latrines and pit toilets, and when I travel to my court in Isingulweni every day and see latrines in schools where children drown in shit buckets, if their government is not concerned about its own population, why on earth would they be caring about the Palestinians? Who the hell are the Palestinians for them? Nobody. So why should they care about the Palestinians when they don't care about the South African population, and particularly the poorest of the poor? So I think we need to stand up and call this hypocrisy for what it is. We need to stand up and take an about turn and not be fools and lemmings to just simply believe that because the ANC leadership comes to your protests, somehow the other day in support of you. They can come to your protest and they can give you a kick in the butt. It doesn't basically make their position any more credible. We need to stand up and see and break down the barriers of this kind of cynicism that is being flowed before our eyes on a daily basis. And of course, therefore, create this necessary change at a very grassroots level, fundamentally, moving beyond protests. We've been protesting for decades. We need to move beyond that. We need to hold our own government to account for its constant trade and support for the Israeli occupation in Palestine, the occupied territories now.
Look, Yusuf, the minute they control your purse strings, then it basically means they control your life, your bedroom, everything else, your children, etc., etc. That's a clear-cut given, and that's where the power lies. The minute, and this is the Zionist ideology. It is the control of financial resources. And we mustn't sidetrack from the fact that Africa is the richest continent of all seven. We've got all kind of mineral wealth here and so on. And then there's that the gap between the have and the have-nots. It's very big. But the irony is this, that the masses still support the ANC. The masses still support. The next election can come and they will still vote for the ANC. When are their eyes going to open up? They'll go to De Beers, buy a diamond for R1, export it to London, polish it up nicely, and come and send it back a month later to us and sell it back to us for 1,000 rand. They paid R1 for it, polished it up, probably made a markup of 500%, with the nominal cost, and then sell the diamond back to us. Who are the fools? When are we going to wake up? I
think that's an important point. And Fadeel, I think we need to possibly wrap up here. And I just want to make a few closing remarks, and then you can make your closing remarks to close the program, because I think the connection is really bad on all the sides, including on what our moderator tells us. I think the reality at this juncture is that since its establishment being bombed into existence in 1948, Israel has sought to portray itself as a tiny country fighting for its survival against the Arab world. The reality is that it is an apartheid state. It is a racist state. It is a settler colonial state. The South African Jewish Board of Deputies supports this racist state. They are complicit in the degree of racism and apartheid that is seen enacted large. South Africans are the only people that are allowed to fight for the Israeli military, can join the kibbutz, and can join the Israeli Defense Force. If any other nation state you go and fight and become a military as a South African citizen, you can be tried and sent to jail for a long time. In conclusion, apartheid is a crime against humanity. Israel is a regional and international menace. It is destabilizing the entire world through its apartheid policies. What you're seeing now at Sheikh Jarrah and the flare-up is not new. It's going to happen again unless we don't see any significant change. And unless the basic reality is changed and Zionist apartheid is dismantled and the state of Israel has to be totally disbanded. Let me argue, not two-state solution. It has to be totally disbanded. Its leaders have to be arrested. Its leaders have to be tried for war crimes and genocide. And then hopefully you'd have to have the creation of a unity government with possibly Palestinians and Israelis side by side, coming together, forming a single joint unity government for people to, in fact, live side by side. But its leadership has to go. The state of Israel as a nation state has to be totally disbanded as an illegal nation state that was bombed into existence in 1948, and that has absolutely no legitimacy whatsoever to exist. And I'll just end with this. Our delivery of the message, وَمَا عَلَيْنَا illa al-balaghul mubin. Our duty is but plain conveyance of the message. And I hope I've made my point clear and articulate in this short program that we've done.
Well, thanks, Yusuf. In closing, I'll probably just take a minute or maybe two. I need to say that 7 billion people around the world needs to wake up. It is time to smell the coffee. It is time to stand up for your God-given human rights that you fight for. An injury to the Palestinians and anywhere else in the world where injustice and oppression takes place is an injury to us, whether we're living in high-rise buildings and we drive Lamborghinis. My brother in the field out there is suffering, he's got no bread. It affects us because at the end of the day, economics and politics are interwoven. And we need to understand that, if somebody hasn't got milk to feed his child and is unemployed and the unemployment rate is 51, 52%, he is definitely going to break into, one of ShopRite's or one of the Colonial chain stores and steal milk because life is more sacred than him. You prefer to go and sit in jail. And at the end of the day, it has a cascading or domino effect on the economy, because then my insurance premium is going to go up, the interest rates are going to go up, your bond rates are going to go up, and everything else is going to go up accordingly. So it does affect us, whether you want to live in a glass house and say, I don't care, I'm okay, Joe, and you, that's up to you in the village you're fighting. At the end of the day, it's going to affect you. So, secondly, we need to understand that you spoke earlier about the, infiltration of the Zionist Jew into South Africa. I've read the report where there's an ex-general in the army, in the old Israeli army, that gained access into South Africa, and I don't know how, and he's training the farmers to defend the farmers against farm killings and so on. Now, much as we are against any murder, any form of unjust murder, including farm murders, we also need to examine who are our friends who came from Israel to come and teach us combat here in South Africa, as if though we are short of military might over here and good training. I think the ANC is going to be caught with their pants down. I think they're sitting out there and internally having their own in-house squabbles at the expense of the broader masses, and we are suffering. They don't care. There's no leadership, and leadership sometimes needs to make unpopular decisions, but that's how you take your people forward. And we have to investigate all these things. Not only the Palestinian ethnic cleansing, going to The Hague, reporting these people. In the old days, they sent people, the South African Defense Force went to send people to Israel to fight against the Palestinians. Those people must certainly be put on trial. And it's not just the soldiers who killed people, but it's also their handlers. It's also the people who gave permission and sent them there. And there's just, this animal is a big animal that needs to be attacked, but certainly it needs to be attacked. Yusuf, I think we've ran out of time. It's been very enlightening, and I hope the people are going to take heed of this. And I hope that, something good will be sparked off from here. I also hope that we will get Mogoeng to come and share his views. We are in a democracy. We're not scared to differ with anyone. And we are humble as well when we are proven wrong, that we can concede that we are wrong as well. But it must be proven. And then we would like to get the Jewish Board of Deputies and the South African Zionist Federation, because they, they've got ties with their friends who control the economy, and they take money from South Africa and send it to Israel. Same like America, who sends money from their taxpayers' funds, $300 million a month, US dollars, to arm the Israelites against the Palestinians. And we need to stop that flow of money, because that's where the power lies. There's just so many things. And then finally, I think it's very imperative that we get Gareth Cliff here, because he's been ranting and raving for the last 2.5, 3 years on the air, he's got his little radio station out there in the wilderness. I don't even think he's got 300 listenership, but be that as it may, he's trying to influence the people and speaking a lot of diatribe and garbage and a lot of rubbish, to be quite frank. He needs to come on the air and we need to unpack what's in his mind. There's just so many things, Yusuf. But it's been fantastic chatting to you. We hope to have maybe a 3-part series to get these special guests on board as well. And we can go deep into thank, Ahmad from the Suk Islam as well for hosting us. It's been a great opportunity, and I'd like to thank the listenership as well. If they want to communicate with us, they're welcome to send us an email, or they're welcome to give us a call. I think we can display the email address perhaps later. Thank you so much, and jazakallah shukran to everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.